The moment you stop explaining, stop waiting, stop hoping, they'll finally understand. Everything changes. Not for you first, for them. Because the one thing a narcissist is never prepared for is losing access to your empathy. If you've been betrayed and you're still hurting, stay. What I'm about to say will flip everything you think you lost. If you've been betrayed by someone who used your empathy against you, this is the ending they never prepared for. And I want you to hear this slowly, because it goes against everything you've been told. The most dangerous moment for a narcissist isn't when you confront them. It isn't when you cry. It isn't even when you expose them. It's when you stop caring. I know, that sounds strange right now, especially if you're sitting with that hollow feeling in your chest. The kind where you replay conversations, question your worth, and wonder how someone who once needed you so deeply could discard you so easily. If that's you, I see you. And I want to tell you something most people won't. Right now, it looks like they won. They moved on quickly. They look confident. They seem untouched. And it looks like you lost. You're the one feeling everything. You're the one trying to make sense of it. You're the one sitting in the quiet. But that appearance is temporary, and it's deeply misleading. Think about it this way. When a narcissist betrays a super empath, they're not ending a relationship. They're making a calculated assumption. They assume your empathy will keep you emotionally available, that you'll chase closure, that you'll want answers, that you'll keep them relevant by thinking about them. I remember reading a study on emotional regulation that explains something chilling. Certain personalities, they regulate their sense of worth externally, through reactions, through attention, through impact. Your pain, your confusion, even your anger, all of that tells them, I still matter. So when they walk away, they expect devastation. What they don't expect is distance. And here's where the illusion breaks. You feel broken because you're processing reality. They feel fine because they're avoiding it. But avoidance has an expiration date. That's the part no one tells you. The collapse doesn't happen immediately. It happens later, quietly, when there's no one left to reflect back who they think they are. When the messages go unanswered. When your energy is no longer orbiting around them. When your silence removes the mirror they depended on. This is why your silence isn't passive. It's disruptive. And no, this isn't about revenge. It's not about winning. It's about understanding the psychological shift that happens when an empath stops feeding a dynamic that was never mutual to begin with. Because the moment you stop caring, not in bitterness, not in numbness, but in grounded detachment, something irreversible begins. You start coming back to yourself, and they're left alone with who they are. And that is the ending they never prepared for. There's an old Buddhist idea that's been passed down for centuries. It says, the axe forgets, but the tree remembers. And I want you to sit with that for a moment. Because if you've been betrayed, you are the tree in this story. The axe swings, cuts, moves on. It doesn't carry the memory of the wound, but the tree does. The rings form, the scar becomes part of its structure, not as weakness, but as information. Think about it this way. You didn't just experience pain, you absorbed it, you processed it, you felt it in your body, in your sleep, in the way your chest tightened when their name crossed your mind. That's not fragility, that's awareness without armor. Empathy was never the thing that hurt you. Leaving it unprotected was. And here's where this becomes important. When you go silent, It doesn't register to a narcissist. The way it registers to you, you assume silence means absence. For them, silence means confrontation, not with you, but with themselves. This is why narcissists panic when you stop responding, not because they miss you, not because they suddenly understand what they lost, but because without your emotional presence, there's no one reflecting them back to themselves in a way they can control. I remember reading a Zen commentary that explained ego as something that cannot exist alone. It requires friction. It needs resistance, admiration, anger. Any reaction will do. The ego doesn't care if it's loved or hated. It only cares if it's seen. That's the trap you unknowingly stepped out of. Your empathy made you an emotional mirror. You reflected their moods, their needs, their sense of importance. When you laughed at their stories, reassured their insecurities, even forgave what shouldn't have been forgiven, you were holding up that mirror. So when you walk away, the mirror doesn't shatter, it disappears. And when there's no mirror, the ego has nowhere to land. It collapses inward, not dramatically, not publicly, quietly, internally. That's why you don't see it right away. There's no explosion. There's just an increasing restlessness, a need to be seen, a need to be validated, a need to reinsert themselves into your awareness. You, on the other hand, are remembering not just the pain, but the truth. The moments you abandoned yourself, the times your intuition whispered and you ignored it. That remembering is painful, but it's also sacred, because it's how you grow rings instead of reopening wounds. Ancient wisdom understood this long before psychology had language for it. It saw that awareness creates freedom and ego creates dependency. And now that you understand the pattern, the next question becomes unavoidable. Why does this hurt them so deeply on a psychological level? That's where the science begins. I want to ground this in psychology now, because what you're experiencing isn't random one. It follows a very specific pattern. Think about the difference between you and them. As a super empath, you're wired for emotional attunement. You notice shifts in tone. You feel unspoken tension. You bond deeply, not quickly. When you connect, it's from the inside out. A narcissist works in the opposite direction. Their sense of self doesn't come from within. It's regulated externally, through admiration, through reaction, through impact. I remember reading a study on self-concept regulation that described it almost like outsourcing identity. They don't attach to people. They use people to stabilize who they think they are. That's where the betrayal miscalculation happens. When they hurt you, they expect devastation. They expect you to chase clarity, to ask why, to want closure, because all of that keeps you emotionally engaged. It keeps them relevant. And when that doesn't happen, something destabilizes. This is why narcissists often resurface months later, not to apologize, not to repair, but to check if they still matter. A text, a like, a sudden memory shared. It's not nostalgia, it's a pulse check. Here's what's happening underneath. When your emotional attention disappears, their primary source of self-reference disappears with it. No reaction means no confirmation. No confirmation means uncertainty. And uncertainty is intolerable for a fragile ego. You heal in the opposite direction. You turn inward. You start regulating your emotions internally. It's uncomfortable at first, lonely, even, but it's stabilizing. You begin to feel solid without needing reflection. They destabilize because they've lost an anchor. You stabilize because you found one. And that's why the power shift feels subtle but permanent. There are 3 things super empaths do next, often without realizing it, that complete this shift entirely. And once you understand them, the dynamic can never work the same way again. I know this is the part where you're asking yourself, okay, but what do I actually do now? Not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, tired way, because understanding the pattern helps, but relief comes from changing how you move inside it. The first shift is external, and it feels almost too simple to matter. You stop explaining. As an empath, your instinct is to be understood. Even after betrayal, especially after betrayal, you want them to finally see the impact of what they did. You replay conversations in your head, crafting the perfect sentence that will make it click. But here's the hard truth. Explanations don't create clarity for someone who benefits from confusion. I remember reading about conflict dynamics where one person seeks resolution and the other seeks control. In that setup, explanations that create every word you offer is something they can distort, dismiss, or use to pull you back into the emotional arena. When you stop explaining, there's nothing left to argue with, no defense to dismantle, no emotion to hijack. It doesn't feel powerful at first. It feels unfinished. But this is the exact moment the power flips. Not loudly. The second shift is where your energy goes. And this one is disorienting. Betrayal forces you to ask a question you may have avoided for a long time. Who am I without being needed? For a while, your identity may have been built around being the understanding one, the forgiving one, the emotional anchor. When that role collapses, there's a void. But something else happens at the same time. You begin reconstructing your identity without an audience. This is the narcissist's unspoken fear. If they weren't the source of your sense of self, then they were never special in the way they believed. I've seen this described in attachment research as an identity fracture. When someone thrives without the person they use to regulate themselves, it destabilizes their internal story. You start to stabilize because your attention turns inward. Your routines shift. Your values come back into focus. You notice your body again. Your intuition gets louder. You're not performing emotional labor anymore. They, on the other hand, grow restless. They watch from afar. They test the waters, not because they've changed, but because your independence threatens the role they assigned themselves in your life. And then there's the final shift. This one is internal, and it's the hardest to articulate because it doesn't look like anything from the outside. You let go of needing closure. Most people think closure comes from a conversation, an apology, an admission, but closure is a decision. It's the moment you stop waiting for someone else to confirm what you already know. Here's the distinction that matters. Silence confuses them. Detachment erases them. Silence still implies attention. Detachment removes the need entirely. And there's no countermove to that. You can't manipulate someone who no longer needs resolution. You can't provoke someone who has stopped asking why. I know this part hurts because part of you wanted them to understand, to regret, to finally see you clearly. Letting go of that hope can feel like a second loss. But it's also the moment you reclaim your peace. This is the step narcissists never recover from. Not because it punishes them, but because it removes you from the equation they were depending on. You don't become cold. You become clear, and clarity changes everything. I want you to take a moment with me here. Just pause. You don't need to do anything. Just feel where you are. If this hurts to hear, it means you're already healing. That ache in your chest isn't weakness. It's evidence that you've been processing, even when no one else saw it. Think about it this way. Pain is often the first sign that transformation is underway. Your nervous system is recalibrating. Your mind is catching up with what your heart already knew. I know it feels heavy. Maybe you're thinking about the conversations that never happened, the apologies that were never given, the moments you replay over and over, hoping for understanding that will never come. That's natural. But here's what most people miss. The heaviness isn't a chain, it's a signal. It's telling you where your boundaries need to be, where your energy needs to go, and where your empathy can finally live without being exploited. Take a slow breath, in and out. Imagine letting that tension roll off your shoulders like water running down a stone. I want you to feel the silence for what it is. Not emptiness, but clarity. Not absence, but space to remember who you are. I remember reading a study on emotional recovery. Researchers found that the moments we allow ourselves to sit with discomfort without distracting, explaining, or rationalizing are the exact moments when the brain rewires itself for resilience. Your mind and body are learning that you can survive being present with the truth and not just survive. So let this silence land. Let it stretch for just a beat longer than feels comfortable. That discomfort is proof that you're stepping out of old patterns. Proof that your empathy is no longer a tool for someone else's control. Proof that your emotional energy is finally returning home to you. If you can stay here for a few seconds longer, fully aware, fully present, you'll feel it, that quiet shift, that subtle sense of liberation. You're not broken, you're aligning. And this pause, this stillness, is the doorway. I want you to hear this clearly. What happened to you didn't break you, it revealed you. Every tear, every moment of confusion, every heartbreak you've carried, it's not proof of weakness. It's proof of clarity, of emotional depth, of the parts of yourself that you've finally allowed to come into focus. Think about it this way. A narcissist doesn't actually lose when they're exposed. People see through the manipulation, the charm, the FI8, and often the world quietly nods and moves on. That's not what destroys them. What destroys them, when you're no longer a participant in their story, when you stop being the emotional resource they rely on, when your attention, your energy, and your empathy are no longer at their disposal. That's the quiet collapse they never anticipated. I remember reading a study on human attachment that said our influence on someone isn't measured by the drama we create, but by the absence they feel when we're gone. That absence is invisible, but undeniable. When you walk away fully, not angrily, not resentfully, but decisively, you create a gap that no apology, explanation, or manipulation can fill. So, I want you to ask yourself this: what if the real ending isn't about making them regret it? What if the real ending is about becoming unreachable, not unforgiving, not cold, but untouchable in the way that matters most? When you reach that space, you're not punishing anyone. You're simply reclaiming your life. You didn't lose your empathy. That's not a casualty. It's a tool, a compass. You've simply learned where it belongs, with people who reflect your worth, not diminish it. You've learned that empathy is a gift, not a liability, and that it's most powerful when it's aligned with self-respect. And as you sit with that, I want you to feel the quiet power that comes from knowing this truth. You are no longer playing their game. You are no longer feeding their ego. You are not waiting for validation. You are simply yourself, fully present, fully whole, fully free. This is your emotional landing, the point where the story stops controlling you and starts reflecting who you actually are. And if you can step into that space, even for a moment, you'll understand something profound. The only victory that matters is the one you've already claimed.